Pop quiz. What is the fall of man? And you're like, oh, John, that's easy. That's when Adam and Eve ate the fruit, right? Well, Wikipedia puts it like this. The fall of man, or the fall, is a term used in Christianity to describe the transition of the first man and woman from a state of innocent obedience to a state of guilty disobedience. Although not named in the Bible, the doctrine of the fall comes from a biblical interpretation of Genesis chapter 3. At first, Adam and Eve lived with God in the Garden of Eden, but the serpent tempted them into eating the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which God had forbidden. After doing so, they became ashamed of their nakedness, and God expelled them from the garden to prevent them from eating the tree of life and becoming immortal. Okay, here's another pop quiz. Name for me the chapter and verse where the phrase, the fall of man, can be found. I'm patient. I will wait. There should be theme music. What is that, Jeopardy playing in the background? No? Okay. Wait, what? Chapter and verse of the fall? You know, it's funny that Wikipedia even says it's not there, but it comes from a biblical interpretation of Genesis. Does anybody else see the irony in that? It's not in the Bible, but it's a biblical interpretation. Cool. Funny thing, the historic translations, and what I mean by historic, King James, for example, does not contain the phrase the fall of man. It cannot be found in any book within the 66 books of the anthology of the Protestant Bible. So why then do preachers the world over read the first 3 chapters of the book of Genesis and then pound their pulpit talking about the fall of man? So why can you quiz pretty much anybody who's gone to Sunday school about the fall of man, and they can give you a reasonably comprehensive answer? Yeah, that's where Adam and Eve ate of the tree, or ate the fruit, right? So here's another pop quiz for you. If there isn't a direct Bible reference to the fall of man, how could it be a biblical concept? So you're saying to me, but John, those words might not be in the Bible, but it describes what happened. It summarizes what obviously happened in the garden, right? Well, if that's your answer, my counter is you've forfeited your intellectual right to a literalist interpretive methodology. I mean, you can't say, well, see, it literally says that right there. Because the moment we're generalizing, because we can't specifically find a proof text, then we can't really ultimately say it's literally in the Bible. So then, if you can fudge your literalism to generalize when it serves your doctrinal feng shui, then pretty much any intellectual conclusion is fair game as long as we can suggest that we summarize the truth. Does that bother anybody? Whatever, doesn't matter. Hold that thought. We will revisit this question much later. But first, I need to bring everyone up to speed. So my name is John Immel. I am speaking at TANC. Well, not actually at TANC, obviously. You can tell that everybody else has a funny different background. I am sitting in my house in Colorado. I chose to move, to follow my dreams, to live in a state where I wanted to live now for a very long time, and I made it. I got here. And then, truth be told, in the spirit of full disclosure, I worked myself into a hole. And once I finally looked up, I realized I couldn't get back to Ohio in time to be with the rest of the folk. So this is me trying something very, very new. recording my sessions here in the beautiful state of Colorado. Please don't come. There are already too many people here. My claim to fame within TANC is that I get to mess with people's minds mostly because I address the philosophical backgrounds of Western Christianity or Western civilization's take on Christianity. Its roots, the myths embedded in modern Christianity, where they come from, what the real intellectual heirs are of modern Christianity, and specifically to address the fundamental tyranny embedded in Calvinism. I have probably said this, I think I've said it in every TANC event in the last, since 2012 when I started talking. Calvinism represents the single most disastrous body of thought ever perpetrated on humanity. I'm unequivocal in my denunciation of Calvinism, and all people and organizations that advance the doctrine. Now, in the spirit of that, I wrote a book called Blight in the Vineyard. I got to read my own tagline, sorry. Exposing the roots, myths, and emotional torment of spiritual tyranny. Now, again, in the spirit of full disclosure, I wrote this using People of Destiny International / Sovereign Grace Ministries as the template. And the people, when you read this book, you will hear names from that organization. If you're familiar, you will know who they are. If you have never heard of them before, it actually doesn't really matter. Just fill in the blanks of your own preachers, of your own movement leaders. I'm 100% sure you will see the trends, the arguments, the logic applied. And it will help you, this book will help you, get out underneath the tyranny. There's an enormous amount of emotional torment embedded within Calvinism, and it's on purpose. It is designed to reduce you to emotional and spiritual and intellectual mush. The last chapter is there's a lot of tools there to help people get out from underneath the nature of that emotional torment. Highly recommend it. I'm a capitalist, so it's on sale at Amazon for $23.99. It is worth every penny. So now I want to talk to you about the Gospel according to John Immel. You're going to see it in a handy-dandy little pop-up right over here beside my head, even though I am not projecting it right this minute. The Gospel according to John Immel, chapter 3, verses 1 through 3. All people act logically from their assumptions. It does not matter how inconsistent the ideas or insane the rationale. They will act until the logic is fulfilled. Therefore, when you see masses of people taking the same destructive actions, find the assumptions and you will find the cause. Now you see what I call the web of tyranny. This is my addition to the world of philosophy. I have identified 5 elements of tyranny, and you will see these 5 elements pretty much in any variant of tyranny. It doesn't actually matter whether it's Marxism or Calvinism or the modern day environmentalist movement. You will find these 5 pillars, and I have represented it as a spider web. And the reason I have represented it this way is to show the interconnectedness of the arguments, how they fit together. And it goes like this: around the top, going to the right, dictated good, incompetent masses, collective conformity, the abolition of man, and universal guilt. Now, in this context, you will notice all of these in the web, they consolidate into the concentration camps, the Caliphate, and Puritans of New England. Ultimately, all of these pieces that you see over here, and I'm trying to do my weatherman imitation here, it's kind of hard. All these arguments are interrelated, and they all consolidate into the middle. And they produce destruction. They produce tyranny at the core, always. Now, you'll also notice I have here in a big red box that says the fall of man. And I want you to realize that the fall of man is a fundamental argument in the web of tyranny. It is connected to, you'll notice, dictated good and universal guilt. So it goes something like this. Actually, you know what? I need to back up just 1 second, and I need to show you one more thing. This is philosophy. Now, all philosophy, all philosophical systems follow this fundamental progression. It goes metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, politics, and aesthetics. So man organizes his ideas by this hierarchy, always. Now, if you want a full discussion of this specifically, I address this in great detail in 2012 and in 2013. I spent probably the better part of 10 hours, I think. And I'm pretty sure you can find all the lectures on YouTube released by TANC. And if not, I know that Paul, 90% sure, that Paul Dose has put all of these files on Paul's Passing Thoughts. So in this instance, all I'm going to do is summarize. The whole point here is that I want you to understand that the nature of metaphysics, remember in the Gospel according to John Immel, if you find the assumptions, you will find the cause. Well, our metaphysical assumptions produce what we assume about what man can know, his epistemology, and what man can know determines the nature of his ethics, and the nature of his ethics determines how man successfully interacts with other people. What does man need to interact? And then last, but certainly not least, is how does man represent those values and reflect them back to himself, and that's called aesthetics, or the arts. Now, man is always in the business of organizing his ideas from the metaphysical level all the way to the reflection level, which is the art stage. Now, having said that, the problem is that most people are inexplicit about this progression. They don't, as a rule, know metaphysics. They might vaguely understand what they think man can know, and for the most part, in popular parlance, man really can't know anything. I discussed this in great detail, I think, in actually last year. No, didn't discuss it so much last year. Last year was how to debate a Calvinist. Highly recommend for those of you who want to take on Calvinists. But I discussed it in 2015 and 2016. So metaphysics, as we go through the progression again, philosophy is metaphysics, which is the nature of existence. Epistemology is how we know what we know. Ethics is how we value what we know. Politics is how we interact with people. And aesthetics, art, is how man creatively reflects back his existence, back to himself. So, the metaphysical premise determines the epistemological qualification, which defines the ethical standard, which defines the political culture. That was a big, wordy way of saying so whatever your assumption is metaphysically about the nature of existence affects how man can understand the world in which he lives, which ultimately defines his moral value, which fundamentally determines his government force. So if you assume that man is immoral, he needs government to dictate good. And now you understand the web of tyranny. Dictated good, universal guilt, ultimately means that man needs someone to tell him what he needs to do. So now let us bring ourselves back to universal guilt and the fall of man. So, universal guilt, what is an essential for all political foundations. When you want to establish tyranny, what you must first do is disqualify everyone from the political space. They cannot be valid. To set up a select few who have somehow magically escaped the corrupting forces of the world, whatever those happen to be in your particular milieu. If it's Marx, you somehow magically don't have any interest in money. If it's the environmentalists, you are, somehow magically in tune with Gaia and the living world, and somehow you're unique in all of humanity. And you should be in charge of hugging the trees and making sure everybody else does too. And if you're a new Calvinist, even though you're evil as a preacher, fundamentally evil as a preacher, really, truly fundamentally evil as a preacher, well, God gave you some special dispensation to shepherd the flock and do whatever he wants you to do. So, everybody else is disqualified. There's always some select individuals who are exempt, but at the end of the day, everybody's depraved, right? Well, the fall of man is a doctrine ultimately designed to do exactly that, to disqualify men. If you can create a story that disqualifies man at the root, and in Christianity, that root is Genesis. That's where we all started, right? Then ultimately you have established from the jump the prevailing inability of all men to govern themselves. So you also see this in examples like this. White people are genetically racist, therefore they are guilty of unconscious racism. They are implicitly fallen. They implicitly support a fundamental guilt that makes them racist. Environmentalists insist that the scourge of the planet is humanity. Humanity is universally guilty. They are universally corrupt and universally destructive to the nature of existence, to the nature of the planet. And of course, all Christians are guilty of sin, even if they've never sinned, because no one ever doesn't sin, right? Forgive the double negatives. There is only one reason to advance universal guilt. It is the foundation of all dictatorial power. So, how does that work? The interconnections between guilt and all other tyrannies are part of the web. Universal guilt equals moral corruption is inescapable. If you're universally guilty, you must be morally incompetent, which means you need someone to dictate moral action. So, universal guilt ultimately means you're morally incompetent, which requires you to be dictated upon. You need someone who can compel you to a body of right action. Then we have, you must abolish your ambition. Because you're morally suspect, any ambition you have is necessarily the ambition of sin. It's the ambition of error. It's the ambition of destruction. It's the ambition of capitalism. It is the rat nature of human existence to eat through the cheese of the world and destroy the world. Any action you take is fundamentally wrong. Any desire for your own betterment is fundamentally wrong. You should have no ambition. Your goal in the world is to become a cog in the vast cosmic machine of whatever tribalist, collectivist business there is. You're immoral. How dare you seek to be equal with God? Don't you know you can't improve yourself? Don't you understand you're fighting the forces of the universe and they have placed you exactly where you belong? God is a determinist God, and he has put you wherever he wants you to be. It doesn't matter what that means. Your job is to stay right there. Why do you want to stand out from the crowd? Are you proud? Are you arrogant? See? The mere fact that you want to stand out and be an individual means you are corrupt. So last year I took on the philosophical foundations of Protestant Christianity's love affair with determinism. How determinism is used in context to the web of tyranny as a tool to dismantle individual initiative. The only way for people to ever unravel the disaster that is embedded in the resurgence of Reformed theology, aka Orthodoxy, aka Calvinism, is to see how the framework, the theological framework, is used to drive their minds and their corresponding actions to a specific set of outcomes. As I said, since 2012, I've been pulling back the curtain so people can see the roots of Christian doctrine. The ancient ideas that have shaped 21st century American piety, and for those of you who have heard me speak before, thanks for coming back. For those of you who are new to me, here is my central thesis. I said this before. Calvinism in all forms and by all synonyms is the single most disastrous body of thought perpetrated on the minds of men. But here is more. 95% of all 21st century Christian doctrine is really a rehash of Platonism. And The other 5% is a stew of other pagan thinkers. And I contend that the doctrine known as the fall of man is no different. It is the byproduct of Greek philosophers, and it finds its logical culmination in John Calvin. And its functional purpose is exactly what I said. And Calvin speaks of the fall of man as if it's axiomatic. It's throughout his institutes. You can go read it for yourself. You won't, because most Calvinist aficionados never do. But the fact of the matter is, it's throughout. But John, it's a biblical doctrine. So here's the thing. When Calvinists say biblical, they mean to say that the ideas come from a source that is unimpeachable in authority. And because they are the heir apparent to that authority, their intellectual conclusions are therefore unimpeachable. Again, I discussed this at great length last year in my discussions about how to debate a Calvinist. They believe they own all things authority. Their single gambit to dictatorial power is staking an unrelenting claim to be God's resident authority. Therefore, they own all intellectual conclusions, which means they own all interpretations, and all interpretive methods, and all measures of truth. So, the result is there is no way to out-authority an authority. It's not possible. Authority is the right to compel. And since I'm not in the compelling business, I choose to avoid biblical discussions. I lay out a case and let you make your own decisions, which also means I don't make appeals to credentials. Fact of the matter is, I'm no one from nowhere. And this is not self-deprecation, but rather an assessment of academic or church affiliations. If you need academic peer review to vet what you can hear, and you need a pastor to say, yea, verily, you can listen to this guy, click away now, because I don't have any of that, and I don't want any of that. If you need somebody to spoon-feed you ideas, there are plenty of guys out there to do it. Me, my goal is to make the best reasoned, rational argument. I expect you to be fully capable of making a rational, reasoned assessment of what I say. If you like what you hear, fantastic. I'm confident you will shape and form your own mind in that regard. And if you don't, that's okay. It's all good. I'll still be here saying the same things. So for the rationally and intellectually independent viewers, frankly, the beauty of modern technology is you can check for yourself and come to your own conclusions. I submit that with about 6 or so hours of Google search, you can find online my fundamental assertion that effectively Christianity is nothing more than rehashed Plato. The intellectual pedigree goes Plato, a guy by the name of Plotinus, Augustine, Luther, Calvin. Having said that, as a rule, I don't crack open Bibles. Mostly because of the question of who has the authority to compel what right answer. And most people, the moment we crack open the Bible, the discussion invariably comes, by what authority do you say these things? Since I don't have any, I typically choose to avoid those discussions. But this year is going to be a touch different. Beyond the fact that I'm at a different location, I'm going to open the Bible and read some stuff. And specifically, we're going to do it to address what I really think was happening in Genesis chapter 3. But don't worry, I'm not going to do what most Calvinist preachers do. I'm not going to crack open the Bible, select any arbitrary verse, and then talk about what I want to talk about. I'm actually going to try to talk about the passages under discussion. It will be fun, but first we need to learn some things.